Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another session of Parallel Barking. My name is Larry Backer, and I'm here with my daughter, Ariana, and we will be barking in parallel, probably at each other. With any kind of luck, we'll be in some kind of sync, but that has yet to happen. So we'll see. Today, we have a very special podcast, a very current podcast. We tend to talk about things that are sort of oblique. But this time we're going to talk about cartoons, and we're going to talk about a specific kind of cartoon. And then there'll be a surprise ending to this, but I don't want to give it away. And so what I want to talk about is the representation of violence in cartoons, everything from Tom and Jerry to Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote to Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd, and more recently and much less metaphoric, although it was quite graphic as well, but much more people, although it was fantasy, the violence in anime and manga. And so I'm looking at this stuff, and the reason I'm looking at this, I recall over the last several decades, there has been, at least in the US, as we move to a very different kind of cultural baseline. And for example, in the ancient cultural sources of our fairy tales, this increasing unease with respect to what are now, given our present values, seen as increasingly problematic breaches of current taboos, which were not taboos back when these things were done: misogyny, child abuse, animal abuse, but also at the heart of all of these things, because the old fairy tales were extraordinarily violent, and in a reaction to them. And then more recently, the transposition of that notion that, in fact, if we're a society that is supposed to be pacific in every possible sense of the term, then ought we not also to worry about not the ancient stuff, because we've already, as a society, been coming to the conclusion, well, at least the people with the influence to help convince us that that's what we're coming to, that all of those things are now hopelessly not just obsolete, but corrupting and therefore forgettable. But that in a society that is meant to be completely pacific, more modern productions of representations of violence, not the violence itself, but the representation of violence in cartoons, for example, is itself either violence, is violence, or an incitement to violence. And so what appears to be occurring is that we have this now conflation, this merging between the representation of a thing, that is, the representation of violence in the form of fantastical cartoons, and violence itself.
Where are you seeing the conflation?
Well, it becomes the same thing. So that if in fact there is violence in anime, right, it's a cartoon, so it's representing violence. Mm-hmm. There is no violence being done in the sense of physical violence on people by people, right, or physical violence by attack animals or guns or whatever, some instrumentality that is either controlled or directed by some person against another, right? It isn't that at all. It's a representation of it. And usually in the context, in a cartoon, of a fantastical kind of sense, with some exceptions, but, anime, and certainly Elmer Fudd and the American cartoons of 2 or 3 generations ago. But the sense that, in fact, those cartoons now not just represent violence, right? They aren't a semiotic object in a sense, but they become the violence itself. They've kind of come to life. And there is, in fact, no difference between me slapping you, right, and me making a cartoon of a cartoon version of me, let's say as a as a big flower pot, slapping you represented as a butterfly, but with your name on it and my name on it, right? And so the cartoon itself would be indistinguishable in effect, moral effect, or perhaps legal effect, from me actually doing it, or from the person actually doing it.
Is that what we're saying? Is that what we're
No,
saying?
that's what I'm saying. And I want you to tell me that I'm insane, or agree with me, or take this somewhere else.
I mean, yeah, let's take it outside, because I don't think that it makes sense for I just don't think that makes sense.
Why?
What do you mean?
Why? It makes perfect sense to me, given the current state of our culture, at least as our alien cultural overlords are now telling us our culture is now looking at. That in fact, because we're in a world of magic, don't you know? If you say something, or if you represent something in a book, in an inanimate object, in a kind of metaphor or symbolic way that's graphical or auditory or something, then you have actually done the thing you've represented. That in fact, there is no distinction between thought and the expression of thought through inanimate objects and the actual deed itself, other than that the deed hasn't been done. And so you can view it as a kind of mirror, or a predictive thing, or an incitement to the thing itself, which will then merge.
I hear you, but I have a hard time believing that every child that watched the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote do their thing immediately, felt the violence upon them, or got PTSD afterward.
So if I were to put your head on Wile E. Coyote's body, and I were to put my head...
But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about that. You're saying the representation.
It is a representation, right? Let me finish. So I'm going to put your head...
You're saying if I am physically being that.
No. I'm saying I'm drawing a picture of your head on Wile E. Coyote's body, and I'm going to draw my head on Roadrunner's body, and I'm going to run the cartoon where I give you a box with a bomb, and you open the bomb, and it's your Wile E. Coyote, but it's your head, so it's clearly you represented, and I'm the Roadrunner, and it's clearly me because it's my head, and I give you the segment of that episode of the show where I give you a package from the Acme Corporation. You open it up, and there's a bomb, and you blow up.
I would honestly assume that you'd want to blow me up. That would be my assumption, that you would want to either blow me up or have me leave the company or the area, quite literally. I wouldn't assume. Perhaps.
So there is a merger then between, or there is this transposition then between the representation of violence, which may be symbolic, and a quite literal meaning of the representation itself. So you would first take the representation to be a literal message, and then to be a message. And then second, you would take that message to be quite literal. It isn't symbolically, I'm upset with you, or I think you're crazy, or your ideas, which is represented by the Acme bag, is going to blow up in your face. None of that. You would take it quite literally that I was still thinking about getting a box of dynamite and handing it to you.
In the mind of a child. I was still thinking myself as a child.
In the mind, my child, in the mind of a 30-year-old.
Okay. Well,
in the mind of a 30-year-old.
Then I absolutely, yes.
How about in the mind of an 87-year-old?
Who knows?
Well, we do know, because Representative Paul Gosar produced a and I'm not going to comment on the quality of this thing. I'll leave that to all of you, but produced one of his political videos, which he tweeted, part of which, a relatively small part of which, included precisely this, right? He pulled a couple of seconds, 10 or 15 seconds worth of an anime cartoon, Attack on Titan, and he put his head on one of the protagonists, and he put the person who he views as his political opponent, Ocasio-Cortez, on the other one, right? And this is a segment in the Attack on the Titan where that character, which now has his head on it, then attacks the character with Ocasio-Cortez's head on it and slashes her with a sword. And then apparently that is then followed by him, now that he's had practice or something, he's going to take his swords and go after this huge head of President Biden. And
which was an interesting choice, I think, because,
for which he was censured for fomenting the violence that was represented on this thing, or inciting, or, I suppose one could censure him for bad taste. And I suppose one could censure him for an exceedingly, not very sophisticated, somewhat crude, beyond tasteless thing, but for incitement to, and all of that would be fair.
What were you thinking?
Well, I'm not going there, but the incitement to violence, and that's what's got me curious, because in a sense, what the Congress, which my sense is that this represents a thinking. It is another representation, in a sense. The act of censure is a representation itself, but it's a representation of a cultural shift that now will tend to view the representation of a thing as either the thing itself or as impossible to read except literally, right? And literally applied to the thing with respect to which it serves as a symbol. And so, in a sense, anime is no longer anime. You're going to look at anime and these figures and wonder, well, who are they supposed to represent? And then, why are they fomenting all of this, either violence, literal violence, or incitement to violence, now that we understand the secret code of the anime? Representative Gosar, of course,
don't give anime a bad name.
I'm not giving, or Roadrunner, right? Representative Gosar was far cruder than that. He left nothing to the imagination. Right, it was his head on his hero, and Ocasio-Cortez's head.
It was crude,
and Biden's head.
To say
it was in I'm not going to judge. It was in his style. And I would not be surprised if it would not receive very many Rotten Tomatoes. I think that's what it is, right? But putting that aside, because it really is irrelevant to the discussion. It's bona fides. For me, it's actually only interesting in the way in which it may affect the way we now approach as a society everything from Tom and Jerry, the old slapstick, even not animated slapstick, but not the Marx Brothers did a little slapstick, but the what's his name, Larry, Curly, and Moe.
That's been changing since
right. But now,
since we had
right. But before it was fussy people who would get huffy. Now it's the House of Representatives who's making a statement saying, "Aha, look, we have changed so much that now we tend to view this thing as not only a thing in itself, but it is the thing it is meant to represent." So that a piece of paper with a rose painted on it is no longer a piece of paper with ink representing a rose. It becomes a rose itself. And then the question is if that rose has some kind of inciting symbolic value. And the reason I use a rose, for example, is because in the 15th of November, in the political protests that were suppressed in Cuba, the symbol for the opposition was a white rose, either on a screen or on a piece of paper, right? And so it's very easy to condemn Gosar for this legislative violence, but what happens when you put, this gets messy very fast in both directions, because in one direction for the Americans, that white rose representing the Cuban people who can't exercise American style political rights in a Marxist-Leninist state, which cuts in their favor, would be viewed as, oh, no, we don't mean that. But then we turn around and it's a swastika and we say, oh, no, well, that's exactly what we mean. Those are heavily laden political symbols, one less so than the other. But we moved even beyond that, where we're not even looking at symbols that are meant to be symbolic politically, but the violence in the form of what had either been entertainment or had been commentary. And I would take anime to be literary commentary, despite what my English teachers might have said. But and
they
so
know
we moved, right. So we moved in a different direction. Do you see that equation? Do you care? Does it matter? Should we just send Gosar either a happy face or a sad face, or ignore him and it? And
I honestly think that it's a bit of a circus, that it's just a little bit of a show. I don't know if the American public cares so much, except for the entertainment value at this point.
Oh, so that the censure itself becomes a cartoon.
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay. And that in fact, what we see now, that's actually a really interesting point. And so what we have is a buildup. Now we've got two animes, two acts of violence, actually two acts of violence, right? We've got three, really. We've got the original anime, right, which was clearly violent for its own purposes in a longer movie, a small portion of which taken out of context and inserted in a very different context, which then is itself a representation of violence, which is viewed to be akin to. And then that itself then produces a violent reaction. Censure is, if we're going to take this literally, censure is itself an act of violence, the power of which is not in the censure itself, but in the broadcasting of the censure. All of these high and mighty people on the television screen repeated as often in YouTube and wherever on television as that little segment of Paul Gosar's video, or as the anime, the Attack on Titan, from which it's drawn.
Yeah, and I just don't think it's hitting as they think it will, or like they want it to. I just don't think that to the American public, they're like, oh yes, he deserves that. They're just like, ha ha ha. This.
But again, it goes back. Is it violence?
This is all. No, this is theater, is what it is.
And Americans like their theater.
Mm-hmm.
Of all shapes and sizes. We don't seem to care what its politics are, as long as it's entertaining, is what you're suggesting. Oh, that's so interesting. I make no judgments. I just think, and of course, I'm coming at it from a very semiotic perspective, looking at, so we're layering meanings, and we're doing, from my perspective, and you're absolutely right. What's theater then? We are layering objects with meaning, then giving them a life of their own, and then inserting them in other as objects in other scenarios, which then acquire another set of meanings. So this becomes this big chain of meaning on the objectification of meaning and the alignment of the symbols with its literal, a literalist symbolism, which is then taken to be the thing itself, which is what makes this scary and therefore entertaining. All right, but what if it's not theater? What if it's just useful?
Who says it's useful?
Well, the protagonists, Mr. Gozar, Ocasio, Representative Gozar, Representative Ocasio-Diaz, the Speaker of the House, all got a tremendous amount of
what?
Well, they got to play.
They got airtime.
In their own theater of violence.
Cool. They always do that. That whole House of Representatives, that whole.
No, don't get political on me. We
No. That is all a theater. That's all a stage. That is what that is. I mean, CNN, C-SPAN.
No. We don't use names on this podcast. We love you all. And we think that you're doing a marvelous job being whatever it is you say you are, all of you.
You did not let me finish.
All right. But
spend their time revealing just a theater. A theater. That's all it is. It's just.
Oh my God. Now you sound like some bad representation of that movie from, where was it, the 70s or 80s Network?
Oh, I love that movie.
Aha. So you are become the product of the violence of that movie.
It's true. I will admit it.
What we may be doing is beating violence to death, which is itself a violent act.
I think so. I think our listeners are probably tired if they haven't already.
Well, I hope that our violence in discussing violence, about violence and its theatricality, will not cause violence.
Violence.
Last words?
Don't be violent.
I was going to say, don't create representations out of objects of violence, which when read literally might make it appear that you are either violent, have committed violence, at least in its representational form.
People stop listening halfway through.
And that's why that becomes nonviolent. It is merely a magical spell to put people
You
to
lulled
sleep.
us to sleep. Thank you.
And that is a very interesting use of violence.
Oh, wow. You're so magical.
And this is a mystery tour. I had to do it. Sorry. I'm going to purgatory for that.
You are.
All right. All right. Goodbye, Ariana.
Goodbye.